So rather than show us
Covered off the tree.
So it's gonna be a bummer fall.
I mean, there's one street will come out it used to be a seriously. Is it sharing? Yeah. Does it mean we might have a little bit?
All right, you're gonna
We might have a little
all we need
bit.
is a baby.
I did not bring out. Sure. Yeah. No, I well, oh, it's warm right next to the thing. Oh, it's accurate.
It being 6:30, I call the Selectmen's meeting to order. There are no changes or additions to the agenda.
There is one non-public that you have to do, 91A.
Moving on to new business, we're here to go over the planned cuts with the White Mountain National Forest, the U.S. Forest Service. And so we're going to be doing that from 6:30 to 8 o'clock, and we are going to have a hard stop at 8 o'clock. So hopefully everybody's questions can be answered.
Okay,
The floor.
do we take it away? Okay, welcome and good evening. I'm glad everybody was able to make it. Appreciate that. And so we're going to just talk about our project we're doing. It's in Sandwich. We're doing a small timber sale there, vegetation management project. But I want to introduce my staff first. So I'm Jim Ennis. I'm the district ranger on the Saco Ranger District, and I'm the deciding official who signs the decision on this environmental analysis. And
My name's Ariana McGlynn. I am one of the foresters on the district.
And I'm Rick Alimi. I'm the assistant ranger that takes care of the timber program.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jessie Dubuque. I'm the district biologist.
okay, great. So we've done a few public meetings. We did one at the Sandwich Selectmen's office, and we did a field meeting last weekend. And I know I see some familiar faces, and so we're going to do this meeting. So I'm glad that people are still coming. So I just want to give you the timeline of what we've done. So we started the initial project development. We had a public meeting in 2020 in January at the library in Sandwich. Maybe some of you came to that. And then we also went and did Sandwich and Tamworth Selectmen's meeting also in 2020 before COVID. Then COVID happened and everybody's memory got erased about this project. And then we started a scoping period, which is required. So we're doing an environmental analysis, which is under the National Environmental Policy Act, and it was required to do a 30-day scoping period. Right? There's a 30-day comment scoping period, and that started June 7th, and we did that. And in the middle of that, we had a virtual public meeting, and that was fairly well attended. Not too many people. Then we generated the draft environmental analysis. These posts. We did the draft environmental analysis, sent that went out for 30-day comment period, starting 7/31/2023, and that ended 8/30, August 30th. And apparently there's some issues with people getting onto the site to do their comments, so we did another second draft, another environmental, we've been talking all day. Second draft environmental analysis, 30-day comment period, starting on the 22nd. And then we went ahead and had a public field trip at Ferncroft on the 24th. And so here we are. We did the Sandwich meeting, select board, and now we're doing the Tamworth select board. So that's the history of the outreach we've done. We typically don't do this many public meetings, but they are fun and informative, and you know, you've done a lot of them when you recognize people from different meetings. So first of all, there's like a lot of stuff I've read on the exchange, and I've seen some newsletters going around, posted around about all the things that are happening on this project, and some of them just are misleading, and so I want to kind of go through those so that we don't have to ask questions about it. Hopefully answer your question. So the first one is that our forest plan is expired because it's over 15 years old, and then we should immediately do another forest plan. So it's not expired. It's still very relevant. Every year we need to get funding to redo the forest plan. It's very expensive. We have to hire a whole staff. So every year Congress gives us something in the appropriations bill that says you do not have to. That over 15 years old, it's fine. And but when we give you appropriations, you have to redo your forest plan. So I've worked on forests with forest plans that are from the 80s because they don't have the money to revise the forest plan. So it's still a relevant forest plan. And it's actually one of the newer ones, actually, that you might find across the country. So the Sandwich project needs to be an environmental impact statement. And I'm not sure where that's coming from or why people are saying that, but the forest plan is an environmental impact statement. And the projects that we do underneath that are environmental analysis, or EAs. And so essentially the EIS has been done. Herbicide use. So in a public meeting, this is where this comes from, I think. In a public meeting, somebody asked about non-native invasive plants. And what I told them was, if we survey for them, and if we encounter them, we will, if necessary, treat them with herbicides. But we're not using herbicides as part of our management. You know, I think maybe some people want to spray herbicides everywhere. That's not the case at all. So at this point, I don't know if we've even identified any non-native invasive species as of to date. So typically, we try to mechanically remove them, but if it comes down to it, we will use herbicides. So the issue being that if we start logging and there's invasive species, when we open up the canopy, they'll spread, right? Or they'll somehow get carried into the woods and spread. So we want to avoid that. Okay, the other one is that the Forest Service is not complying with the Executive Order 14072, which is about carbon and old growth. And the simple answer to that is we have no direction on that. So when the executive order starts, when it's proposed, it takes years to actually get the policy on that executive order, and then we get the direction on what we're supposed to do. So really what that executive order talks about is inventorying old growth, and then it has a whole section where it talks about sustainable forestry, and it talks about stopping international deforestation. And so until that executive order is turned into like an actual policy and there's direction, they're not telling us to do anything. So I can't make up policy. We're the low people on the totem pole. People tell us this is how you're going to do it, and we do it, we execute it that way. The project will take 5-10 years. Okay, that's true, but it's really misleading the way we wrote it in the EA. So I just want to clarify that. The project could take up to 10 years, but there's going to be 2 timber sales that come out of this project. Each one of those timber sales could take up to 5 years. But for example, we're not going to be hauling timber out of any one place for 5 years. So a lot of people felt like, oh, you're going to be hauling timber out of Ferncott for 10 years. And it's like, no, maybe a year or more, but depending on the logger. But it's not going to be for 10 years out of any one place. It's just all the activities in the project would be implemented potentially over 10 years. So I don't want people to think like, we're going to be hauling stuff out of Liberty Trailhead for 10 years. That's not going to be the case at all. And where does the money go from the timber sales? So this is a kind of a complicated question to answer. We have two different kinds of contracts that we use. We have our regular timber sale, and then we have a stewardship contract. And under a regular timber sale contract, the money from the sale, some of it goes into what we call trust funds. And these are authorities passed by Congress that allow us to retain money for certain things. One of them is the Newton-Vandenberg Act, which is for replanting or other project work on that sale area. The other one is the salvage sale fund that goes into, and that is for implementing salvage sales. Another one, right? That's another one. Brush disposal.
Yeah, we don't use brush disposal on the White Mountain, but those are the two main ones.
And then stewardship is a different authority, which allows us to, it's basically a barter system. So we're having the logger, or purchaser as we like to call them, do work on the project area, like so for example, habitat improvement, or fish passage, or doing thinning or something like that. And we basically are trading wood for that work. But in the end, there's more wood, right? And so they end up paying for that wood, and that becomes, goes into an account, that money, and then we can use that on the forest. And the nice thing about they're called retained receipts, that money, retained receipts, is then can be used for a variety of different things, but we keep all of it. With the original timber sale I was talking about, after those trust funds, as much money has been captured in the trust funds, the rest of that money goes back to the Treasury. So one of the things I've heard is that we're padding our wallets with money from the timber sale, which is not true. We don't use it to pay our salary. We're not going, oh, okay, we're going to get all this money and we're going to, buy some new trucks or something. That's not exactly what's going on, because that would be corruption, and that's not happening. Any questions about those? Yeah.
Can you explain salvage sales?
Yeah, so a salvage sale is, I'll have Rick describe it, since he's an expert, and I'm just
Yeah. A salvage sale is to recover trees that are dead or dying. And here in the forest, we don't have any sales that are 100% salvage like they do out west. Oftentimes after a fire out west, they'll come in and do a salvage sale to try to recoup some of the wood that's been in the fire. Here in the forest, we have a mortality rate around 10 to 15% of the trees that are out there. And so we can collect up to 15% of the money off of the sale to put in the salvage fund. And then the salvage fund then can be used to work on future sales. So, the projects that come out of this, a percentage of what we put into that project will be paid for out of the salvage fund. But most of it is paid for out of appropriated money by Congress. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so for example, saw oak mortality, especially in the Conway area. That would be the kind of thing that you would go and do what we call a salvage sale. When I worked out west, a similar type of sale might be, we had a lot of bark beetle, still probably have a lot of bark beetle, and that was killing swaths of lodgepole pine, and that could be implemented with a salvage sale, for example. Any other questions?
Jim, based on what you said about where the money goes, it sounds like the vast majority of it will stay within the forests, and then some goes off to Washington, and who knows what happens.
It goes to the Treasury, the general Treasury. Right. Yeah, so if it's, when we're using a stewardship authority, where we get to keep those retained receipts I was talking about, that is a dollar for dollar. We keep that dollar for dollar on the forest. The trust funds do have a little overhead rate, so we don't get dollar for dollar on those. Rick, am I hitting this correctly?
And the overhead rate goes and it covers salary at different levels of the organization, and those rates are recalculated every year, so they do change somewhat.
Yeah, it's kind of like your 401k, right? You have to pay a little fee for that to be managed. That's exactly what's going on with that. So it's not dollar for dollar, but retained receipts is, and so that's kind of our preferred way to do things. And then we can take that money And we can use it for water quality projects, habitat improvement projects, road, anything that's to do with water quality. So we do trail work with some of that money. We just transferred $75,000 to WODC to do trail work on Dicey's Mill, I think. So that money is really really good to use for that kind of projects. Anything else?
Yeah, could I ask just about the stewardship program? Does 100% of that come from salvage sale, or does stewardship include other sales that are not just salvage?
A stewardship contract, the money that is collected at sale, the first thing that has to come off of that is enough money to cover any road work, that if we have to rebuild a road or something to make the sale operable, that comes off the top. The rest of that money, we then can evaluate that and put that towards approved projects that have been approved that meet the criteria for a stewardship project. If we have more money than the projects, and those projects are done by the timber purchaser when they're in the contract like that. If there's extra money, that's collected into a pot that's called retained receipts from stewardship. It has nothing to do with the salvage.
I see.
And then that money, we can spend it pretty much anywhere on the forest if it meets the criteria of a stewardship project, which is primarily for water quality, protecting water quality. And so the example that Jim made for the trail work that WODC was doing was to improve a trail so it was not eroding.
So of the sale that's going on from this project, is 100% of that stewardship, or is some of it the other kind?
We haven't made that decision. There's going to be two sales that come off of this. The Guinea Hill sale, which we're planning, if all stays on track, we're planning to offer that in fiscal year 24, probably next summer, a year from now. The Ferncroft and Liberty side of that will be offered in 2026. And we'll make a decision as we get to putting those contracts together on whether we want to use a normal timber sale contract or a stewardship contract. There's pros and cons for that. The normal timber sale contract, money goes into the treasury, minimum amount up front. The roads get paid for if necessary. Then we have our trust funds that we can put money into. The total dollar value of those sales gets tracked, and that dollar value goes towards 25% payments, which come back to the towns that have the sales. And it also provides money for the Secure Rural Schools Act.
25%.
Yeah. So money will come back to the towns that way, and that money is to spend on roads and schools. When we do a stewardship sale, the value of that sale doesn't count towards the 25%, but allows us to do it and spend the money on the forest for all the other types of projects that we've been talking about. So we try to find a balance, because we don't want to do all stewardship sales, because then the towns aren't going to get any money back out of the value of the timber sales. But we don't want to do all regular sales, because we have a lot of backlog of work that we can use the stewardship money to accomplish projects.
I see. And you won't know the balance of those two, which is the timber sales and which is the stewardship, until the project really begins and you get proposals you get bids on it.
We'll decide before we sell the sale which contract we're going to use, because it'll be advertised on one contract or the other. And we haven't sat down to really look at that yet. We have no idea in the end how much value we're going to have on these sales. What we have in the EA is basically average guesstimates across the entire forest. But once Jim signs the decision and it's made and we start implementing it, the first thing we'll do is we'll go out and we'll mark the boundaries of the units. Then we'll go out and we'll cruise the timber. And we'll get an actual estimate of volume that's on the sale. And then we can come up with a much closer value of that. And then when we know the value, we can look to see what are projects that would qualify for stewardship or not, and make a decision which sale contract do we want to use on the Guinea Hill sale. And down the road, when we implement the other side of it, we'll do the same thing. My guess is probably at least one of these will make stewardship. But which one is the most favorable to capture the most money for projects. It'll somewhat depend on road cost on the projects and how many other types of trust fund projects we could do, because those have to be approved. And outside of what's called required reforestation, we have to make sure we have enough money from a timber sale to pay for reforestation costs, because we're required by the National Forest Management Act to make sure that that stand is regenerated and growing trees again within 5 years after it's cut, unless we convert it into a wildlife opening, and of course we're not going to grow trees on the opening.
How many towns or is this involving?
Most of the sale is in the town of Albany, I think, and some might be in Tamworth.
And the rest is in Sandwich.
Yeah, and then some, and not much, I think most of it's Albany. isn't
Yeah,
it?
so the Liberty and Ferncroft sale units are in Albany, and then the Guinea Hills mostly in Sandwich, I believe.
Yeah.
So.
I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
That's why we're here.
While we're here.
Yeah.
For the $75,000 that went to WODC, which is really terrific, to help for trail maintenance, which timber cut did that come from?
That came from a pool of money. All the retained receipts from all the stewardship sales across the forest go into one pool of money.
I see.
And then when we have a project that we think might fit the criteria, we have to do a plan and get that approved. And once that's approved, all the projects that approve they're submitted to a small review board, about 4 people, I think, is it, on the forest? And they'll look at the projects and say, this is how much money we can afford to take out of that fund this year, and what's the most high priority projects will get the biggest bang for the buck to protect water quality.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So every year we have, we submit projects, submit proposals. So the way I like to look at it is that there's revenue generating activities like a timber sale, and there's ones that do not generate revenue. And so replacing a culvert for fish passage, or doing some habitat improvements. So some things just cost money, like trail, and they don't generate any revenue. So the idea is to take that money, make it available for us to do, trail work. We typically do a lot of trail work and I think culverts and road work with it. It's typically what we do, a lot of water quality stuff. And then in the case of WODC, we have an agreement with them, and we transfer that money to them, and they make a contribution, typically in kind, I think, and then they implement, right? So they take that money and they implement it. They hire a trail crew. And so that's pretty much how that works. Making sense? One more question. No.
Okay. This is it for a while. But can we assume that of the money that you get from the sales in this project, that some of that will be reserved to repair any damage that is a direct result of the cut that you're planning?
Not that money.
Yeah, not that
The
much.
timber sale contract that somebody will enter with us, that has requirements. So they have to, as part of that sale, do that.
Got it.
So we can use money such as stewardship money if we come across something out there that's causing a water quality issue from a sale at the turn of the century and it's still causing problems. We could use the money to fix that. But anything that's tied to the actual operation of the sales that we'll sell here, through the contract, they're required to take care of that.
Got it. Thank you.
I have a question about the executive order 14072. Does that specifically reference old growth or mature forest as well?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's about mapping it, figuring out how much we have as an inventory.
And I assume there's been some mapping in the past, at least with old growth in the White Mountain National Forest.
Yeah.
Is any of that in the vicinity of these proposed sales?
Well, there's the Bolt natural area. There are remnants of old growth about. Typically, we don't tell anybody where they are because we don't want people going there. But yeah, there are. Typically, it's just remnants that we find. I know in this particular project, we found a stand. We found an area that it was trending that way, had characteristics and so we excluded that from the sale. So we're looking for a bunch of different things when we're looking for old growth. Is it trending towards that, or is it, wow, somebody, they didn't want this? And that happens, believe it or not, which I find incredible. So the thing is with old growth too, is I'm not sure why people, I know people think, oh, you're gonna log it because the trees are big. It's like, I don't think anybody wants to log big old, yellow birch. You know what I mean? It's like, so the quality's not there. So oftentimes people think, oh, it's a big tree, so you're gonna wanna log it. And it's like, that's not true at all. So most mills wouldn't want that.
Most mills have an upper limit that
Yeah.
they'll take too, so those big old growth trees, you're not gonna want them.
They're not gonna want them. Even the big, huge white pines, well, sometimes the mills aren't tooled for that size of timber anymore. If you have a small mill or you're running, a wood miser or something, a portable mill, those are the ones that people, for timber framing or whatever, they'll cut those up, and that's desirable for them. But I think sometimes these big trees show up and they're like, yeesh, that's too much for us. You can't cut that. So. Then there's several executive orders that are coming out about climate change, and so we're waiting for direction. That's kind of where we're at. It's like until we get that direction, we can't move forward with anything that people want to hear that. Even when we get direction, I don't think it's going to change much on what we do on the ground. It's going to change. It's going to direct all the mapping of the old growth and the inventory of the old growth using existing data. And so we have a network of plots across the country, the Forest Service does, where they monitor changes in land use, and that's how they do it. And we have some that have inventoried old growth. And so they're using that data to do it. So it's existing data, and whether they're going to add to that, I'm not sure. But that's how they do it. Okay. Question?
Just a clarification for me. So an official environmental impact statement has been done, or the equivalent? Or is there a distinction?
The forest plan is the environmental impact statement. So when you have that, an EIS is what we like to call it, because it's easier. That basically is saying we're going to have a significant impact. Like, so when they're putting in a big dam or something like that, it's like, you're going to have an impact. And they just disclose what those impacts are. And that's what an EIS is. An environmental analysis is the way we do our projects is we start with an area, and then as we find things, we're like, okay, that'll have an impact, so take that out. That's old growth, take that out. Oh, this is sensitive plant habitat, take that out. That's a cultural resource, take that out. And we just whittle them down until there is, all our timber sales are really the same. They're on the same kind of forest type. They're just in different places in the forest. And so that's how we do it. So a lot of, you'll see these big units and people think, oh, you're going to cut all that, or, that's just the analysis unit. Usually we do less than that. So we start out with a huge area, that gets whittled down, and then that's what we analyze, and then it gets smaller. So the maps I'll show you here in a minute are the analysis maps. Anybody want to add anything to that? Oh yeah, so the FONSI, not the Happy Days FONSI, but the finding of no significant impact is what we end up with. So that's, when you see that FONSI, that's what that means. So, and when we explain why there's no significant impact, it has to do with the way we mitigate it. We just mitigate everything. Oh.
Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of concern about being too close to some of these trails. And for instance, you're not going to use the Liberty Trail as a skid trail, I think.
We would not do that.
How close to the trail?
That's a historic road.
Well, that's it. You talk about a cultural feature,
Yeah.
you just mentioned that's pretty cultural.
Yeah.
So are you going to leave some good buffers around those trails and those areas?
So we're going to leave 33 to 66 feet around trails where we have group cuts. If we're doing a thinning, we'll just go up to the trail because there'll still be forest there.
Right.
So we're not going to have a clear, we're not going to have an opening right next to the trail. And that's what we do. That's how we've always, that's usually the buffer we use. In the EA, it's misleading because it says 50 feet, and it's talking about slash disposal. So when we're near a trail and there's slash in the trail, like so there's been a logging operation, within 50 feet, we have to get that down to how far to the ground? A couple feet?
It's trails, roads, or private property. We'll remove all the slash to 50 feet, and then beyond that, for an additional 50 to 75 feet, we'll have it locked down so it lies within a couple feet of the ground. So it gives you a kind of like a transition before you get to just in the woods.
So visually, you're not seeing like piles of stuff. So that was in the EA, and that 50 feet has kind of caught people's attention. But if you read the whole thing, it's just talking about slash and how we will treat the slash that's around. It's on what just Rick said, roads and trails.
That's my biggest concern is aesthetics. I mean, you go out Mount Catherine, I don't know when that was done, not too long ago, but it looks like crap. when
That's
you're
not our-
driving.
That's not
It's
national
not us.
forest.
Okay.
So
I mean,
any
I don't want to look at that, you know.
any
Like-
forestry you've seen around here has not been us,
Okay.
because we haven't been here in like 20, 30 years. So Mount Catherine's private. I haven't seen the cut, but I've seen some pretty serious cuts around here. That's all private. Are we in for 8? 7 bells?
So, to just support what Jim's saying, I understand your point, and I would just say that the National Forest is held to a much stricter and higher standard for treating property, for treating land. We have the National Forest Management Act. We have a variety of different national environmental policy acts that we have to follow. So state land and private land aren't held to as high of a standard for aesthetics, for water quality, for erosion, that sort of thing. So we can provide documentation if you want to look into it, if that helps.
Yeah, so I actually looked at the state standards, and I also looked at some standards that were in easements, and the federal standards are higher than that. So we have probably the strictest laws that we operate under.
Yeah, we follow state best management practices, and then we have our own that we add on top of it. So it's layers of protection and
Yeah,
management.
there's a national, what we call BMPs, best management practices, and then there's states. All states have their own.
I'm curious to understand more about your silvicultural practices as far as what you're trying to accomplish in the actual harvesting, and then especially interested in your prescribed burning aspect.
We're going to get into that.
Oh, you are?
Okay, so we're working our way over there.
Okay.
Okay, so everybody, well, maybe not everybody doesn't know this, but the Forest Service is multiple use management. And that means we do recreation, we do timber, we do mineral collection, we do wildlife, we do, fire. So we do a lot of different things on the land. So compare this to the, like some people say, oh, we wish this was a national park. National park is preservation. Like they preserve it and nothing changes. They have some recreation, but it's mainly about preservation. This is the problems I can't read this. So we manage every acre of the forest via management designations, right? And so they're in the forest plan, and you can look at. There's a lot of them. There's actually quite a few of them. Wilderness, scenic areas, timberland, non-motorized areas, etc. So there's quite a few designations. What we're working in is the general forest management area, and that's typically just recreation, timber management in those areas. And you asked a great question the other day when we were on the field trip, and you said we were talking about forest health in the general forest management area, and you said, well, how are you managing the wilderness then for forest health? Well, we're not. And that kind of brought me to a bigger point, which was, the difference between the management and the general forest management area compared to wilderness is that wilderness, if there is a beach leaf blight goes through there, it will kill those beech trees, and that will be a disturbance. Those trees will die. They'll fall down, something else will grow, right? Depending on how big the opening, the size is, how much light gets in there, there'll be a mix of species that come in. those are disturbances, right? There could be a windstorm and it could blow some stuff over in the wilderness and other trees would grow up, right? Those are disturbances. Those are natural disturbances. And where we're doing forest management, we're creating disturbances. We're creating disturbances to get back what we want, right? And in this case, it's wildlife habitat and it's certain species that, again, will be marketable in the future. I often get this question. It's like, well, why do you need to manage the forest? And it's a great question. And if you think about it, the planet is a system, right? And it doesn't need to be managed. Anything man-made needs to be managed, right? Your septic tank, septic system is somewhat natural, but it's got to be managed, right? You got to pump it out. You got to manage your house. That's all these man-made things. Forests are natural systems. They don't actually need to be managed unless you want something from them. And in this case, we're managing them for timber and wildlife habitat. And that is really the difference. And so the question is, do forests need to be managed? No, they don't. But if you want something from them, if you want to go to Home Depot and buy a 2x4 for $4, yeah, that's coming from a managed forest. And so that's kind of the difference when people ask me, like, why do you need to manage a forest? I said, well, we need to manage it because we're getting product out of it, right? So, I mean, you can have, stuff growing, wild blueberries, and you can pick those, or you can cultivate blueberries. And those are the difference, right? So you go out to a pine stand, there's all that low bush blueberry, you can pick all that stuff. Or you can go to pick your own blueberry place, or you grow your own bushes and you can cultivate that. That's basically the difference. But anyways, I was out mountain biking and I was thinking about your question, so.
Well, I just want to clarify, my point to you was that this project has been sold as managing the forest for the health of the forest. And my question was, does that mean the wilderness, the 35,000 acres, is not healthy because nobody is managing that? And so we've changed the language a little bit because now we're talking about managing it to get something out of it. That wasn't what was really being brought forward earlier.
Well, the thing is, no, we're not managing the health of the wilderness. I'm not saying it's sick, but yeah, there's a lot. There's woolly adelgids coming through. We got beach bark disease. We're going to have beach leaf disease, emerald ash borer. Yeah, those are going to be big disturbances in the wilderness. But wilderness, we don't do anything, right? Because that's just growing and trending towards an older forest.
I have a question for the room. Do you want me to shut the doors? Is it being too cold? Or do you want to open? Cold. Open.
Not cold. Okay.
I think cold is winning.
Manage the temperature.
Manage the temp. See, buildings have to be managed. I was just using that as an example because people often ask me, why do you manage? Because we're extracting everything. This building's made of wood. These are, Okay, so these are the 3 areas we're working on that we've analyzed. And so this is Guinea Hill. And that is Ferncroft. Oh, I got a pointer.
Could you repeat what you just said?
This is Guinea Hill right here.
That's in Sandwich.
That is in Sandwich. This is Ferncroft, and that is in Albany, I think, for the most part. And then this is Liberty Trailhead. Liberty. We're just calling it Liberty. And these big black hatch mark things, those are where we're going to do some prescribed burns.
Can you say that again? What? The acoustics are terrible.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to do some prescribed burns there.
Oh.
Yeah, and those big. I'll get to the next map better. So we're going to focus in on, this is Ferncroft, and you want to talk about the prescriptions? Because I have this one, I have the other one, and I have the one with the group cuts in it?
Yep.
Okay. You want the pointer?
So this is an area that a lot of people have had the most questions about, and I think that I want to put forward to you, I went to school for this, and so I'm going to try and explain it the best way that I can, but if I say something that doesn't make sense to you guys, please feel free to ask questions, raise your hand, and we can clarify. So silviculture is the art and science of managing forested lands. So there is a lot of science that goes into it. We have different guidebooks that tell us how we should manage certain kinds of species in certain areas, and every spot is different. Like all three of these stands have the same prescription type, but that doesn't mean that they're all the same. They have subtle differences, and the goals are ultimately going to be different. The other factor that goes into this is that there is an issue of timing. So different kinds of treatments rely on different kinds of timing. So the things that you will see in the EA are, we discuss how many acres we're cutting, and we discuss when we're cutting it, as in the season. And so I kind of just want to start with explaining what treatments and when for each of the areas. And so Unit 35 is a thinning, so down here at the bottom, thinning. So thinning, basically the goal of this is typically we apply thinning when there are too many trees, and we're trying to open up the growing space. Think about yourself as living in a box for most of your life, and you don't have the room to grow. But once it's opened up, you get the chance to grow in more, have more nutrients, have more growing space, have more sunlight, and that's a really big factor for why we would do a thinning. The goal is to maintain the healthy trees, the healthiest trees, and remove trees that have certain kinds of defects. And in this area, we're looking at a winter harvest. So it may be assigned a winter harvest because there's wet areas. It may be assigned a winter harvest because we're trying to protect certain kinds of regen. And so that's for the thinning. For these 3 units, these are group selection units, and I know that these all look very large. At the field meeting, we discussed that we're not cutting all these acres. Like for 39, that's 245 acres. But we're not cutting all 245 acres. We're cutting, I believe, 47, but let me double check. Yep, 49. But when we say 20%, we can cut up to 20%, so we could always cut 15%. And is the group example in this PowerPoint?
It's what we said.
Okay, so there's going to be an example of what group selection looks like, but basically, if you could imagine
Do you want me to scroll down to it?
it's okay, I can get it, it's okay, thank you. Imagine this having Swiss cheese over it, and there are holes where we're opening up pockets of the stand to allow for sunlight and regeneration, and promoting diversity in this stand. So group selection, trying to get some diversity in age class and in stand structure and species. And then down here we have a single tree group selection unit. So think of that as almost like a combination between a thin and a group selection. So we're pairing the two together where we're selecting, again, we're selecting certain trees that meet certain characteristics to retain or to cut, because we want in the future a healthier, more diverse, and more variable age stand. There are other factors that go into this. A lot of it's having to do with wildlife and having to do with aesthetics. We don't cut 247 acres as a clear cut, which is an even age management. In our forest plan, we can only cut up to 30 acres using a clear cut method, which again is you're thinking of a forested stand and then you're taking it to all the early zero stage, and then it will all grow up at the same time again, unless other treatments are put in between. So does anybody have questions about specifically the units up here? Oh, also, for clarification, 36 is a summer unit and 39 is a summer fall unit. 70. 40 is a summer fall unit, and 46 is a winter unit. Questions? Yes.
Could you talk us about specifically what kinds of trees you have in those different areas? Are they now monoculture? For one example is the Mount Mexico area where you have a lot of very young beech trees, and how you're dealing with these different areas in terms of the kinds of trees that are there specifically.
Right. So in this area, it's mostly northern hardwood stands, and the issue that we don't want to have going forward is we don't want all just one species dominating an area. We want to have multiple species. Every species serves a different purpose with wildlife and within the ecosystem itself. And so there is, none of the units in here are even age, so they wouldn't form a monoculture. I'm trying to think of it. Basically, the purpose of the treatments, especially in here, is opening it up for introducing diversity that's not currently there. And that's diversity, again, in species type, in tree size, in structure, and in age. Did that, I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I guess more about these trees in particular, because
yes.
I've heard that they're not, I guess, desirable at this point, but when there's cutting done, I mean, I just remember going up to find the top of Mount Mexico and going through total monoculture of beech trees because they kind of brought everything else out. My understanding is that the way they grow, they discourage anything else from growing.
Beech is what we call a dominant species, and it's very, very shade tolerant. So it will stick in there and survive no matter what cover is over it. Whereas a lot of the other trees that are the desirable trees we're trying to get in here need more open light in order to germinate and grow. And so if we weren't here and we didn't have the concerns about aesthetics, we'd probably create much bigger openings, some clear cuts, because we can achieve silviculturally in the long term what we would really like. But because of this area, when we did it, our landscape architect did the analysis on this area, because of the sensitivity, the decision was made we weren't going to create any openings bigger than 2 acres in size. And so the groups that Ari was talking about are going to be from 1/10 to 2 acres in size. And they'll be located in pockets where we want to try to get rid of beech and open them up to sunlight to try to get yellow birch, maples in there that have a better chance of surviving and growing. The 2 acre size, visually from the view sheds, like down by the church and places like that, you won't be able to see the ground in there because they're small. At the most, you might see a little textural change in the canopy, but you'll be looking at trees. And of course, you'll see them when you go up near them, but you'll go back pretty quick. So we're changing the microclimate in those areas to get the trees we want, and at the same time, from a wildlife standpoint, we're creating young habitat, which is really lacking in this area for all the species that need young trees to, mate in, to live in, to feed in, or whatever.
What varieties of trees are primarily taking out?
In this area?
Yes.
So poor form trees, and the best example of a tree that would be have poor form or poor health currently is beech. And that is just simply because in this area we've had beech bark disease around since the 60s when it came from Ohio, I think. It's the best example because it affects the way that the tree grows, it affects the way that the tree competes against others, and basically, if we're going into an area, we're looking at whatever trees are performing the poorest and trying to maintain the healthiest indications of those species, and also maintaining or future goals of what's dependent on the microclimates there. So we use, should I go into ELTs? No. I think we're spending too much time on this, and like I said, this is something that I studied, that I went to college for, so it'd be very hard to explain it entirely. Can we talk afterwards?
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
The field meeting was great for this discussion.
I have pictures that I can show on an individual basis. Yes. I think that I just saw this hand first, sorry.
Thank you. I was just wondering, like, when you're thinning trees or cutting or doing whatever, will the trails be open, or do you close the trails, or, I mean, I imagine, the prescribed burns might be, create a certain amount of danger, but.
And I think that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So we do talk in EA about rerouting trails if necessary. There may be moments where they're closed just briefly while we're felling some trees. It really depends on the situation. Typically, we don't have that problem. I know we did a sale, northeast Swift, where we cut some trees near the Nanamokomic. And we sort of they had to put somebody out there while they felled the trees and then pulled them off the trail. So, if anything, it would be temporary, or we would reroute it. So.
Yes.
Could you state again which areas you're going to cut in the wintertime?
Yeah, that is 35 and 46. And that's all in the A.
There's a table in the back that talks about it.
Does anybody have any more specific questions about Ferncroft? Did you? Yeah, specifically about Ferncroft.
You're looking at me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just curious, we had a very wet summer, and then in the wintertime, we hardly even get enough snow or frozen ground.
Yes.
So you're going to have the flexibility that if it gets too wet and there's too much rain, or the ground isn't frozen, that you can shut down the timber sales so no ground damage occurs.
That's a fantastic question, and that's exactly why we have contracts where we allow for the loggers to come in different years. So that's why they're the length that they are. So one winter we could have a fantastic winter where the ground freezes and we get all the conditions that we want, and then another winter we could have a winter where we just don't get enough snowpack. And that is, we have somebody on the district who's out there continuously during operations, who's checking to make sure that the conditions are correct, so that issues like what you would think about with harvest during the seasons that they're in, like, don't occur. So, for example, if it's bucking rain like it was this summer, then they may there's an instance where we can put a pause and.
Yeah, our contracts are very, very tight as far as us having control over operations. And we do have a full-time timber sale administrator that their job is to monitor sales. And so they're out there as much as needed, looking at conditions. And if the loggers try to push it, we'll stop them. Ultimately through the contract, they're responsible for making the decisions on their own, but they know we're watching them. And we will stop somebody if we think it's too wet or whatever. They can get time back on the contract for lost time because of weather. And that's one of the reasons that 5 to 10 years is out there. My guess is if everything goes normally with this and we sell the sales when we would like to and we're planning to, the last of the Liberty and Ferncroft sides of things would probably be done within 8 years from now. But there could be additional time added. If somebody loses more than 10 consecutive days due to weather, they can request what's called a contract term adjustment, and we'll look at our records and say, yep, you're right, you had 12 days of rain that you couldn't log, and we're gonna give you 12 days back on the other end of the contract to make up for that time.
And so the sale administrator is balancing the business operations of the contractor and resource protection at the same time. So there's this balancing those two things. It's not an easy job.
I know I did it for years.
Okay, well, there you go.
Questions specifically about fern crops?
Have you ever?
It's related to what you have just been talking about, the species diversification. And it's a very elementary question, I'm sure, but how do you know that you're going to get the diversity that you want?
So that's where the art of silviculture comes in, because that is the definition of it, is that it's art and science. We're doing best management that comes from past management that we've done, and we do certain kinds of management because that is how we have seen diversity come in. And
the Bartlett experimental forest that everybody knows about is one of the oldest managed experimental forests in the country. And we're very fortunate because the research done there is mostly on northern hardwoods, the best ways to treat stands, to manage them, to improve the quality of the stands and the species diversity. And we use that information for what we're applying. And then after a sale is done, we do surveys 1 year after a cut is done, and then 3 years after a cut is done, to ensure that it is reforesting to what we want and that it's revegetated. And then at 10 years, we'll go out and sample some trees. And we've been doing this for forever. So we've got a track record of seeing what results we get for these types of treatments when we apply them in certain conditions at certain times of the year. And that's one of the things that helps contribute to why we go at certain times of the year to do certain types of cuts, because we've learned from doing this over decades what works best and what doesn't.
yeah, and just to add on to that, for the stalking surveys, which is what Rick was just discussing, that's my job to go out and take those. I go out and I lay out plots and I visit a certain number based off of the size of the plot that I'm doing, so how big of an area that I'm analyzing. And I get the species and I say how they're doing, and then I have to write a summary of that, and that is all to satisfy the National Forest Management Act, but it's also to satisfy the goals of the silvicultural prescription that's written for each of the units, and to satisfy the goals that we have in our forest plan. So we could just stop it at NIFMA, which is the National Forest Management Act, and what they have, but we continue to go further and we go with what are the goals of the actual prescription and what are the goals on the forest. Does that answer your question? Okay. I'm going to move to the next area. So Liberty has more prescriptions in it, but again, it still has group selection, and it also has in it single tree selection in this unit, and it also has a prescription called a 2H prep cut, and also a 2H prep cut with seed trees. All of the descriptions of these prescriptions are in the EA, and I really suggest reading that. And we have another thinning similar to what we had over in Burcroft, and we also have patch cuts, and we have the patch cut that's going to be a wildlife opening, so the goal of that opening is not to necessarily become reforested again, that is to maintain an open area specifically for wildlife. And then we also have 2 clear cuts in this in Liberty. But how are we doing on time?
We're
About 7:30.
about to
Okay. Yeah, does anybody have specific questions about Liberty? Sorry, I'm trying to get through to each area so that we can make sure that we can ask questions about. Yes. Go for it.
And this is just about the single tree cut. What kind of trees are you cutting? And presumably that's for timber?
For a single tree?
Yeah.
So
Depends.
it depends on, I have an idea in my head on that. So trying to think of the best way to explain that.
I would say oftentimes single trees used for, sorry, hi. Play dodgeball here. Oftentimes single tree is used for softwood species to maintain a denser canopy, more shade, and often to release existing regeneration that's there. So in a softwood stand, for example, you could have a scattered hardwood tree that's overshadowing the regeneration of hemlock or spruce. We would remove that single hardwood tree and allow the existing regeneration to thrive. Does that make sense? Okay. And then just go ahead.
A single tree is multi-age. It's an uneven age tree. So you're going to have lots of different sizes and ages of trees in that stand. And over eternity, if it's managed as single age, it'll always stay forested in different age classes. Trees like that.
And then a quick note about the wildlife opening. It is flanked by 2 trails, so when you hike there, you will see it. The whole point of that is to preserve and release some very healthy, robust, very productive red oak trees. Remove all of the competing vegetation in and around those. That opening will, it's a clear cut with reserve trees, if that makes sense. So we will go in and we will stump it, remove the stumps, or at least push them out to the perimeter so that we can either mow it and maintain it by bush hogging or by prescribed burning. Any questions about that opening? It's the only one in any 3 of these areas.
And I do just want to clarify, this is a patch cut. So the size, yes, but it's
semantics,
yes,
verbiage.
Yeah.
So patch cuts are smaller than 10 acres?
Yes, smaller than 10 acres.
Smaller than 10 acres.
Yeah.
So that's about an 8 to 9 acre opening.
Yeah.
And someone asked about prescribed fire. I think it was you.
Yeah.
So that, right there, that is the prescribed fire unit we're doing. And that is to clear out, so that's an oak stand, and we're going to clear out all the competing vegetation. And what oak does, and we have some slides at some point here, kind of at the end. What it does is it has a taproot, and it has reserves in that taproot. So it's adapted for this type of disturbance. And the oak will get killed, the top of all the trees will get killed if it's a successful burn. There'll be some that'll live and remain, but the undergrowth will get removed, and then the oaks will just shoot up, right? Because they have this reserve, whereas the other species have to get going again, whereas the oaks are already. So you get a nice straight stem that way, and then it's in a competitive position in the canopy, in the lower canopy, so that it can grow. So what happens is we talk about beech, and beech is very shade tolerant, is it'll just take over and shade out all these oaks and maples and desirable species we want. So we remove all that, remove everything, take it back down to 0, and then the oaks will shoot up and get a better advantage. Yes, the beech will come back and everything will come back, but the oaks will be in a better place, and the stems will be straighter.
David?
So we're taking down the beech, then we're hoping to grow some red oak in the future, and then we're, for the things that we want to harvest, are they like white pine and oak? And, I don't know anything about trees, but...
It's a myriad of species. So it's a combination of different northern hardwoods, depending on the prescription and the soil type that they're growing on. So it could be, depending, like in the clear cuts, for example, we're hoping to regenerate sugar maple, red maple, yellow birch, paper birch, aspen, where it exists. And then in some of the other, in the group units, for example, we would remove diseased beech primarily to create openings for a more diverse seed bed.
When you say you want to harvest northern hardwoods, what does that mean?
All the species I just discussed.
Okay.
Yep.
And another reason that we would do group selection would be to release regeneration that's already in the unit and give it a chance to have sunlight. So, for example, in softwood stands, softwood species like hemlock and spruce and pine, they can exist in the understory for a time, but eventually they're going to go into decline and die in shaded environments. And so because this is a manageable area, what we're doing is we're going in and we're identifying where it is that we would find areas that have an understory that needs to be released, and we'll identify those areas to open up and allow for more sunlight to come in.
We gotta move on.
Okay. So this is the last area, it's Guinea Hill, and there's one prescription that we haven't mentioned yet, which is the overstory removal. And that is here up in Unit 28. So 27 we have here at Thin again, 23 is the single tree group selection, 29 is group, 19 is a patch cut. Won't go directly into which ones are which, because you can read the EA for that. But we have another prescribed fire unit in here, and again, that is mostly targeting northern hardwood areas where we're trying to do as Jim described and give different species a competitive chance against species that would otherwise overtake them. Does anybody have any specific questions about Guinea Hill?
Is the white in the center, is that the pond?
The white in the center, are you talking about this?
No.
No,
The donut.
below.
Oh, this, no, actually that is an old harvest unit. So,
So where's the pond in this?
the
Oh,
pond
right there.
is right there, yeah.
Got it.
Any other specific questions about this area?
What's happening in the old harvest unit?
What's happening? Oh, it's growing. And actually, you know what? It's actually really fun because in the center where the landing was, there's growing back some really cool pine that it's not doing great, but it's interesting to look at just because it's multi-stemmed. And that is not the healthiest way for it to grow, but it is interesting to look at. So,
And no active management.
no active management.
And when was that harvest?
In the early 1990s.
Okay.
So,
Patch cut example.
this is not a patch cut
I mean,
example. This is a group
group
selection example. And so, like I said, we can harvest up to 20%. So 20% of 200 is 40. So we can harvest up to 40 acres of the total 200 acres. And I gave you guys the Swiss cheese example from before. And basically what that can look like is if we worked in here, this is, I can't remember what this adds up to exactly, but it's under 200. But basically what these areas are is they're individual groups.
Under 40.
Under 40.
Under 40.
Sorry, under 40. It's under 40. And so, again, the point of this is to introduce more sunlight. It's to change the microclimate, changing how much humidity is in these areas and allowing for different species to come in. So this area could be a softwood stand where these areas were areas that were identified with to have understory growth that need to be released and allowed to have more sunlight, or this could be a northern hardwood stand where we're trying to introduce a greater amount of species mix. I hope that this is better at showing how diverse the sizes can be. Usually within a softwood stand, we lean towards smaller groups because we're not, as much sunlight is not needed. We are identifying where the areas are that need sunlight and we're keeping it pretty much to that area or a little bit bigger. In hardwood units, we want more sun and less shade, so we go bigger on the group size. But the group sizes can be anywhere between 0.1 acres and 2 acres, but it's never greater than 2 acres. Yes.
How do you get the trees out of these areas without disturbing other areas?
So, we use skid roads, and those are areas that basically the essence of group selection is we're taking certain areas and we're taking them down to 0. And sometimes there can be leaf trees in groups, but between these groups you need to get to all of them. And the way that we do that is we create skid roads. And the skid roads are basically made with the intent of the most logical spot from here to here is straight through here. But the most logical way from this unit to this unit might not be straight across. It might be going at 14 and then coming here. Because turns out there's a stream that comes right here and we can't put anything right there. So we're very selective on where we put the skid roads, and that's another thing that's monitored by our sale admin to make sure that the loggers are following those exactly, and they're planned out and they're with the same goals in mind for the groups.
For visual, if you can imagine like a pearl necklace, for lack of a more specific description, imagine it looking almost like a pearl necklace, but the reason that those groups are in that particular location might be because I identified a vernal pool that I don't want disturbed. I want it protected and buffered, and so the skid road would go out and around to protect it, and the groups would be laid outside of it.
But other trees will be taken down probably up before those skid roads.
Correct. And we often will relocate new skid roads onto the old footprint. So the field trip that people were at on Sunday, we walked up an old skid road to go into the woods to look at that group unit. So that's generally the width and the size of what they look like.
There's roads, some of you probably know, all over the place in the woods that may have been there actually before the government acquired the land. So there's old roads all over the place. And so we use those as much as possible.
Exactly.
We don't want more roads. And they're trails, really, not actually roads.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, should we move along? Okay, so here's the oak example. So this is the old stem, right? This is a new stem coming in. This is a new stem regrowth. Okay, that's stem regrowth, and this is killed by a prescribed fire. So we actually did a burn out in the Moat area, in the Moat Mountains, near right around the Birch Hill neighborhood, and already the oaks are just shooting right up. So that's a pine oak stand there, and we got a really good regeneration now with that. It looks really good. It's like a lot of blueberry coming in, a lot of bracken fern, and this is basically what a prescribed fire looks like. So it's spotty. You know, it doesn't take everything. It takes some things. It creates a mosaic. And so here's another shot of oak. So normally our fuels planner would be describing this, but he's not here. And so here's just some more examples of fire going through. And then this is the flush, the herbaceous layer that will respond after we're done with the burn. So already, I mean, if you wanted to go out to that area, it's like where the ultimate single track mountain bike trail is. Right behind Cedar Creek condos. There's an access trail there that you can go see those burns. It looks just like this. So really lush. Any questions about that? About the burns?
I just have a comment to add. Can we go back to
The previous one?
Yeah. So I just want to point out another thing that we're trying to get. We're not just trying to get a growth response where the oak is getting a chance to grow up over other species and get a competitive, not necessarily advantage, but just like a chance to run in the race. It's also, if you look at this stem, do you see how it curves? But then this new stem is straight. So trees respond to light in different ways, and one of the ways that they respond to it is they'll bend to get the light. They're chasing the light the whole time. And sometimes when that happens, that makes them susceptible to different things like wind damage, and that could cause cracking, and that can introduce pests and pathogens that way. And so really the best thing that you want for a tree is for it to grow straight. You want it to grow up towards the sunlight, and you want it to grow in the healthiest form that it can take, which in case of a forested stand is straight up and not at its worst.
Not sideways. Okay, so that one, okay, so this is a 10-year-old clear cut. That's what it looks like after 10 years. We're just give this a couple time-lapse photos here. So that's 10-year clear cut. That's 20-year clear cut, not the same clear cut. And that is a 30-year clear cut. And I assume that's a road in the middle of it. So just for reference, I mean, they fill in pretty fast. Tree growth here is pretty rapid.
And what to note is
Yeah.
the paper birch trees and the red maple trees, which I can discern, but you probably can't because you're far away. But the diversity of species, and yes, you do have some beech here, you've got the beech leaves hanging on. But the diversity of species that you'll acquire from a large opening with a lot of light is much greater than something that grows in a low light condition.
So this one,
There was aspen on the right-hand side too, wasn't it? On that photo, so
Yep.
Yep.
oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yep. And that's very, very limited on the landscape. So whenever I find that as a biologist, that's super important.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you know the life cycle of an aspen? Do you know how to get more aspen on the landscape? What do you need to do? You cut it.
You cut it.
Very counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But aspen, like clonal aspen out in Colorado and Montana, I mean, they're single root source, right? And
Right.
so they persist over time with disturbance. They stump sprout, that's the word.
Yeah, so you clear cut it and let the heat get to it and the sun, and it takes off.
Great root called habitat.
True story.
It is. Great, well, that is it, I think. Oh, yeah, that's it. I thought I had some more slides.
You do.
Well, this is, that's actually hidden. So these are just slides I dropped out. So that's, because you just can't read that anyway, so.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I had a
for us?
general question. How much new road work is going to be required to access these units? And are the roads going to be there permanently, so subsequently you can go back in future years and use the same road system?
There's actually no new roads here.
No new roads?
We'll be on the Liberty side where you go into the trailhead parking.
Yep.
That's a class 6 town road. But on that road, we're gonna improve it, get rid of the big potholes. So we'll make that road a little bit better to get in there. And then on Guinea Hill and down on Ferncroft, the Spring Brook roads, we'll be doing some what we call reconstruction, which is basically bringing the road back up to the standard when it was built originally, so that it's suitable for hauling. And then, those roads are there. Actually, the road down in Spring Brook, we originally got the right-of-way for that in 1954, so that road's been there for a long time. It's been used several times since then. So we'll improve that road to use it, and those road improvements will stay for the future. But we aren't building any new construction.
Will they be able to be used for trails or recreation afterwards?
Well, down in the Ferncroft area, there's a lot of ski trails in the wintertime.
Right.
And, the roads are used. A lot of times, we were talking about skid trails. We have a lot of places where after we've had a sale, the skid trails have been turned into cross-country ski trails.
Right.
And so other uses can happen on them.
People use them.
So, the bridge that is at the beginning, the
Mhm.
wooden bridge, and I think, Jim, you were talking when the Outing Club met with you, that probably to bring logging trucks over that bridge, there would be a temporary spanning
We don't
kind
know
of thing, you
yet.
know? But my question, I guess, is, if a temporary span was used, would you be able to ensure that, and I'm thinking particularly of the Outing Club groomer, which goes across that bridge, so at the end of all the logging, that the bridge would be in as good or better condition? That wouldn't be damaged by any of the temporary activities, so that we would still be able to come and go with the groomer, because that's one of the Outing Club's biggest concerns, is it's a pretty big machine.
When we start to implement the project, our engineers will look at that bridge and we'll get a rating on that bridge to see if it's still suitable to haul a log truck over. If it's not, we'll look at what it would take to fix that bridge. And if it's less expensive for us to accomplish our project by not touching the bridge, we'll put a temporary bridge over the top of it. We do that all the time. And when that happens, usually it's a temporary bridge that's put on an abutment on each side of the existing bridge, and it spans that bridge so that it's probably about a foot higher than the bridge. So nothing ever
So
touches the
No
bridge.
weight, none of the weight.
No-
So that-
Nothing
okay,
ever
that-
touches the bridge
that's helpful
underneath
to
it.
know.
When we're done, we'll remove that bridge. I'm sure the bridge that's there is suitable for groomers, for regular vehicles and stuff. It just might not make it to carry a full logging truck over.
Yeah, we need to have, it's up for inspection, but we do it all the time, right? So we put these temporary bridges over town bridges, we do this quite a bit. Yeah.
I have two comments about cross-country skiing. One, if you could do the winter cutting in one winter, that would be awesome. And the second thing is, on what, I can't see that clearly, but I think you call it the Spring Brook Spur Road, which goes
Right
east.
here.
Now, you can see it goes kind of southeast, and then it goes northeast, and then there's a kind of a horseshoe turn. Immediately after that horseshoe turn are two nasty steep stream crossings. And if you could leave some permanent bridges there, that would be awesome.
I don't know if we'll be putting bridges or large culverts there. The engineers haven't
Culverts would be perfect
come up with
too.
something yet. And
We talked about this, I
Yeah.
talked about this with the outing club, this potential of leaving just some permanent culverts in there.
yes.
The Giddy Hill area? Giddy Hill area, you're talking Sandwich Notch Road, right? You're gonna be logging out of Sandwich Notch Road?
No, it's off of Mount
Mount
Israel.
Israel. Near the bed and breakfast.
There's the bed
Oh, on the
and breakfast
corners.
Yeah.
Okay.
right here.
Yes.
The bird sanctuary is
Yep.
right here.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, I don't know, it was up here. Yeah, this was, I don't know,
So.
4 or 5 years, well, maybe more than that though. The bird sanctuary did some logging back
Yep.
here and used the road. That was the last.
So will you be
sale.
hauling out of Mount Israel end or Wing Road? The tarred end or the dirt?
It all depends on who buys it and what they want to do with the wood. Last time it was long, I think it all went up on Ezekiel Road.
The dirt road?
I think so. Yes.
I'm interested in what your percentage of wilderness and managed forest are.
Wilderness, I can't tell you off the top of my head. On the forest, which is roughly 820,000 acres, around 46%.
46.
That is 2.1 land, which is the actively managed land. And that's what, when we look at everything, but when we do a project for timber management or wildlife management, it's on the 2.1 land. Wilderness, I'm not sure how many acres. Ari's taken
But
a look.
for the 2.1 land, the management land, only about, well, maybe a little more than half of that is actually accessible. So 2.1 land also is a recreation component as well, but it's not like it's not like we have 40%, we're not doing harvest operations on 46% of the forest because we can't get there, it's too difficult. It's rough ground.
How much of the forest do you think we harvest every year?
That's a great question.
Anybody have a wild guess? What
It's
percentage?
percentage.
How many percent?
What percentage of the forest is harvested in a year?
I think you told us before. we
Yeah, I'm
had
testing
one
your
of these
memory.
meetings, 1 to 2%.
0.01%.
So 1/10% of 820,000 acres is managed.
Is how much we cut each year.
Each year.
And that's New Hampshire.
No, on the White Mountain National Forest.
There is a portion of the forest that's in
Yeah.
there.
And you don't know how much of that is wilderness?
Oh,
No,
just
none
not off
of
the
it.
top of my head.
It's not-
None of it is wilderness.
It's in the forest plan, we're just looking it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't.
Was it 7
Trying to keep
wilderness
that.
areas? Was it 7 wilderness areas?
There's the Pennajuwasset, the Sandwich, the Presidential Range Dry River, the Great Gulf, and the Caribou Speckled Mountain. So we're gonna do some quick math for you, hold on.
I'm not sure if the question is how much of the forest is wilderness or how much wilderness are you doing work in?
We don't do any work in any wilderness.
So I think that's the answer that
Okay. No, we don't do anything in wilderness is,
Really easy to manage.
yeah, we don't do a thing to it. If it all blows down tomorrow, that's how it's gonna stay until it grows back naturally.
Just like we were just talking about earlier,
Yeah.
it's like, if a windstorm comes in and blows it down, like the Hurricane of '38 did, we'll just leave it there as it is.
Do you guys have any idea at this point, like, is this stuff marketable that you're hoping to cut? And who might be taking it for what purposes?
It's hard to say, it's hard to say who, because if we advertise it as a straightforward timber sale contract, law requires that we sell it to the highest bidder that meets all the qualifications that can log that. In other words, they're financially sound, they have all the equipment and the expertise to do it. So when we open bids for that, it's all sold by sealed bid. When we open the bids for that, whoever bids high, if they meet the financial determinations, they get awarded the sale. I can't say I like this guy better, so I'm going to award it to him. On a stewardship contract, we've got a little bit of leeway. They submit sealed bids for that, but they also have to submit a proposal for the work that we put in there that they're required to do as a stewardship project. And they have to write up that proposal and tell us how they're going to do that project. And when we were given the authority by Congress to sell timber that way, they gave us the ability to use some judgment, and we can pick somebody that might have a lower value on the timber that they bid because their proposal for the work we want is much better.
They might have a expertise or a method or a piece of equipment that we think, oh, that would be accomplished to work better with less impact. It's pretty common that it goes that way. I've seen specialized pieces of equipment like, being chosen over money.
So if we award it to somebody that's not the highest bidder, we have to write a justification on why we're doing that. But we can in that case. They still have to meet all the financial requirements and determinations, but we don't have to go with the highest dollar.
And to add on to your question, there's 2 mills right over here, and they are probably going to be interested in buying this sale, I would think, because it's so close to the
Ossipee
mill.
Mountain, the firewood business, has already told us they're interested.
They're interested in it, yeah.
In some of this.
So it's going to be, the closest mills are usually the ones that want to get it because they don't have to truck it very far.
So to answer your question about percentage of wilderness, about 115,000 acres, I rounded, it's about 14%.
Of the forest.
Correct.
So the rest of it's managed.
It's
No.
managed in a,
No.
there's probably 15 different types of management areas that our forest plan directs us. Each one has a different goal and objective. Wilderness we've discussed. General management, 2.1 land is a combination of timber management, general forest management, and recreation. There's research natural areas, there's experimental forest areas, there's a whole plethora of different management.
Alpine ski areas.
Yeah. there's-
So what we said earlier was 46% of it is in general timber management, and the rest is in
all the
other kinds.
Yep.
Where
But
we don't
wilderness
do
is
any.
important.
We don't do any management.
Right. You're welcome.
We do recreation management, or we manage it,
Sure.
which
Which
is
is
not
not timber.
timber.
Yes.
So in your opinions, with all the concerns that you've gotten in these meetings, would you push a little harder for the stewardship approach, where you would be able to be more selective in the actual, the logger going into these areas that people have so many concerns about, like with the recreational ski trails that the outing club has and the people with the hiking? Would that weigh into your decision on how you would approach it? Would you be able to do that?
Well, first we start with which one is a suitable, in terms of the balance sheet, like which one would be a better stewardship sale than the other. And that's where we start. So I think Rick said earlier, one would probably be a stewardship sale.
Yeah.
Don't know which one.
As I had said, we don't want to make everything a stewardship sales, because if that happens, then I'll probably start getting some phone calls from some towns, why aren't we getting any money for roads and schools, etc. Jackson is probably the town that has been calling me the most over the years that I've been here, wanting to have an idea of how much money we're going to be getting next year or the year after, what activities going on. And so it's finding a balance so that we can, you know, get good project work done, but we can also get some money coming back to the towns from the timber program. Either one, I don't think it's a huge issue because our contractors that we've had are typically repeat contractors, and we've had great success with them, whether they're on a stewardship sale or a regular timber sale contract.
There's some really good loggers here.
But to your point, I mean, the stewardship funding can be used from across the forest here potentially. So I've put in different projects for submission and review, and I've received money from timber sales that happened over on the Pemigewasset district to do mastication contract, for example, to restore historic apple orchards in Maine. So just because the stewardship sale does or doesn't get chosen in a particular area doesn't mean that the restoration work would or would not take place in this area. Does that answer your question a little bit better?
Because the money goes into a forest-wide fund and then we distribute it. So the money for Dicey's Mill, for example, came from some other timber sale someplace else. So.
It is 8 o'clock, so I appreciate, I know, the clock's off, but it is 8 o'clock, so thank you everybody for coming out tonight, and we appreciate all the questions, and thank you for coming and answering all the questions.
Thanks for inviting us. You gave me this. GovernmentOversite.com. Okay.
I don't have like a wallet.
There is or is not. They have a kitchen, but they don't have a bathroom. That just makes sense. Okay.
You guys are coming and explaining it all. I know it's probably tedious.
And so they had, you know, we set up games. So we coordinated any roads that are out there. They would go to anybody else.
They're right down to the science.
I would say game.
I mean, I get it. You have a certain way to trees grow back. There's a lot of difference.
That's accurate about the open.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
I can't stand it. I do a lot of hunting. I love going out for that reason. We go out and talk about different aspects of what we do, and then COVID hit, and we stopped doing it. But I did it with a whole bunch of different partners. It was all about recreation, and so we did other things like working with clients.
I just don't take the time to talk about it. I kind of Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you.
Coming so much.
That's my problem.
We get credits toward our forestry license for that. God, what I would have is credits towards that hazard mitigation plan.
Oh, yeah. And some more.
That's money in the bank.
25, I'm worth more than 25 bucks an hour. I want to point that out.
I feel like it's getting, I was gonna give you 15. I wish we could just get the whole town signed.
I'll dial in.
Okay, hopefully this is a short meeting. What time is it? 8:04. Oh, it's 8:04, right, that clock is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so
You can fix that.
I'm just gonna I make a motion to approve the correction to the meeting minutes for September 12th, 2023.
Second.
Roll call vote.
You say yes?
Fair, yes.
Roberts, yes.
Schaefer, yes.
4 yes, 0 no. Moving on to old business.
Can I ask what the corrections were?
Yeah.
Yes.
It was for non-public under RSA 91-A:32E, the correction is that the minutes, we voted for the minutes to be sealed, but they did not get written into the minutes.
Into the public minutes.
Into the public minutes that way. So we're changing the public minutes to show that the minutes were sealed.
Thank you.
Administrative report.
Headed balances.
Hey, it has it on here.
Well, we had a lovely meeting from the forest. $3,317,520 is our bank balance, and I really don't have much to report.
Yeah, that sounds good. Signature file. I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes. Oh, we just did that. Excuse me.
That's just to.
Yeah.
There, yeah.
I make a motion to approve the land use change tax for map 211, lot 52 in the amount of $500.
Second.
And for map 205, lot 26 in the amount of $9,500.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
You say yes?
Fair, yes.
Roberts, yes.
Schaefer, yes.
4 yes, 0 no. I make a motion to approve the driveway permit for map 205, lot 26, sub lot 5.
Second.
Roll call vote.
You say yes?
Fair, yes.
Roberts, yes.
Schaefer, yes.
4 yes, 0 no. Select board update. Is there anything that anybody really has that they would like to go over? Should we do a select board update?
Dude, we're gonna kick you under the table.
So I thought that was how that was going to go, so I will skip on to public input.
Yes, I do have a comment.
Yes.
In the last meeting you missed, I had mentioned that it would be a good idea for you to basically adopt, like you would your employee policy. You should adopt the police policy. Now, I stood by this RSA, you can read it later, it doesn't matter. But the operational word here is may, that you may do it. So that's why I just advised you could do it, even though the attorney said.
What's the RSA number? Well, I'll just consider it. Thank you.
All right.
I just want to make sure that I'm standing behind that RSA.
Yep. Thank you.
And that is a good idea for risk management.
Is there any other public input?
Did we make it clear that we're going to weekly meetings?
Yeah. Keith told me. I don't know if there was any.
To the public.
They're all on the
They're gonna be
calendar,
posted,
but
yeah.
it's good to share with.
We're going to go to weekly meetings in the month of October and probably November to deal with the budget because it'll be. I don't want to be here till 10 o'clock every Thursday.
Yeah, it's too long. We already have a strong, big agenda for next week.
Nice. All right, moving on to, is there any other public input? Hearing no more public input, we're gonna move on to, I make a motion to go into non-public under RSA 91-A:32A, section 1, and RSA 91-A:32A, section 2.
Second.
You look at me like I was doing something, saying something.
No,
Roll call vote.
Did you say yes?
Gary, yes?
Roberts, yes.
Schaefer, yes.
4 yes, 0 no. We are now entering non-public at 8:08 p.m.